Anaïs Nin has always been a controversial figure in literature, mainly because of her life choices, which included many taboos, especially when one considers the times, primarily the 1930s to the 1960s before the sexual revolution. One of these taboos was adult-onset incest with her father when she was 30 years old and he 54, of which the world became aware with the 1992 publication of the diary Incest, which details Anaïs's relationship with her father, Joaquin Nin, who, during her childhood, was ascending as a concert pianist and composer. Today, I will reference the recent book, Reunited, the Correspondence of Anaïs and Joaquin Nin, 1933 to 1940, to explain the affair and also to debunk some myths surrounding it, such as it didn't really happen and that it was Anaïs who seduced her father, both of which are sometimes believed. Another thing, Anaïs Nin's biographer, Debunking, claimed that she and Joaquin destroyed their letters after reading them. What she didn't know was that Anaïs had carefully conserved them and kept them at her Los Angeles home, where I discovered them in 2007. In 1903, shortly after arriving in Neuilly-sur-Seine, France, from Cuba, Joaquin Nin and his wife Rosa had their first child, Anaïs. The pregnancy was unplanned, and the presence of an infant when Joaquin was constantly touring and promoting himself around Europe was untimely. It is entirely possible that he, and perhaps his wife too, considered her a burden and therefore held a resentment towards her, a possibility Anaïs mentions in her adult diaries. Anaïs from the very beginning was trapped by a family constantly on the move, France, Cuba, Belgium, Germany, but not America, which Joaquin considered uncouth, uncultured, and savage. When Anaïs was very young, Joaquin, an amateur photographer, began to take pictures of his daughter, and later his two sons, nude. He also subjected all three of them to severe beatings when they disturbed him. Joaquin Jr. once told me that his father would lock his mother out of the attic where the whippings took place, leaving her on the stairway screaming as she could hear the beatings. An aura of hostility and war hung over the house in spite of the constant music and parade of celebrity guests. Joaquin was a very popular figure in classical music, noted for his talent, but also for his impeccable clothing and incredible good looks. It is no exaggeration to say he was surrounded by young women who would easily succumb to his charms, and unquestionably some did, which created great jealousy in his wife, and therefore an already combative marriage grew more hostile. Sometimes the battles grew so fierce that Anaïs screamed at them, begging them to stop. In 1913, after the 10-year-old Anaïs had been hospitalized in Brussels for 3 months with an abdominal infection, one that nearly took her life, doctors, realizing the direness of her condition, recommended moving the family to the south of France, where Joaquin was performing and where the climate was forgiving. The place he rented was a crumbling chateau dubbed Les Ruines, and this would be the last time Anaïs would live under the same roof with her father. When Joaquin prepared to leave for a concert tour, suddenly Anaïs was overcome by a fear she would never see him again. She says in Reunited, "An immense, acute, stabbing premonition rends me. I throw myself on him, kissing him passionately, clinging to him, holding onto him violently. 'Do not go, Papa.' Convulsively, I hold him. I have to be torn away. He wavers and then collects himself and runs off. I did not see him again for 20 years. He had left the family for his young piano student Maruca, the heiress of a wealthy Cuban family whom he married when she was of age. In order to give her family a chance at economic survival, Rosa, seen in the center of the photo, took them to New York City, where her Cuban relatives would help her find work. This is when Anaïs began her diary as an impassioned letter designed to lure her father back to the family. As time went on, however, she realized he would never come back. It was then she lost her religion and began to rebel against the harsh realities of life in a foreign country. She left school at 16. She modeled for artists to bring in money, and she stopped writing to her father. In late 1924, the 21-year-old Anaïs Nin returned to Paris when her new husband, Hugh Geiler, got a bank position there. Anaïs's mother and younger brother, Joaquin, accompanied them. She saw her father only once, for a brief moment during an awkward encounter. By 1933, Anaïs had become a writer, had published her first book, and had grown to be a beautiful woman, having an affair with the writer Henry Miller, and was infatuated with the actor and writer Antonin Artaud. Joaquin had achieved fame as a composer and performer, and since Maruca's family was ultra-rich, he was living a life of luxury. Joaquin wrote to his daughter in early 1933, expressing his desire to see her, which he did at her house in Louvciennes outside Paris. He was utterly smitten by her beauty and womanly charms, calling her the synthesis of all the women he had loved. He began a series of intensely seductive letters which both flattered and overwhelmed Anaïs. Letter after letter from her father, and it worked. She agreed to visit him alone at Valscourt, near the Riviera, in June 1933. The place was Quayer's Grand Hotel, which was a favorite spot for Joaquin. He promised Anaïs they would celebrate the fires of San Juan in his room, and that's not far from what actually happened. It was 9 days of intense, uninterrupted lovemaking. Anaïs Nin waited for several days before recording what happened in her diary. When she did, she seemingly left little out. The passages were first published in Nin's Incest diary in 1992, and the unedited versions appear in Reunited. Anaïs left Valscourt on July 2, 1933. As the train pulled away, both father and daughter had intense feelings about the days they had spent together. His letter reads, "All my life I have hated Sundays. The one that marked your departure was particularly horrible. Lucid, bright, and flamboyant, you left. It seemed to me that the train took the sun with it, and my room seems cold and somber, this room where we welded our lives together forever by the fire of San Juan." More than a month after their separation, Anaïs became impatient about the amount of time it would take to reunite. She writes to him, "What do I want? To see you as soon as possible, to be with you. I asked myself last night, how would I be able to wait until October? Valscourt was just a week, but a week that I did not expect, that I did not imagine." In mid-August, Anaïs rushed to Valscourt, believing her father was ill and in need of a nurse in the absence of his wife. After she arrived, she and Joaquin drove to Évaux-les-Bains in the Midi. The time in Évaux was as fiery as that in Valscourt. As she feverishly wrote about it in her diary, her handwriting deteriorated to the point where she had to print the words. She says, "Great character in spite of extreme sensitiveness, forcefulness, violence when necessary, physical power, heroism, all the heroism except the one that impelled him to marry a mother, a woman who believes in him. The weakest side of Papa, like mine, cannot wear espadrilles. They remind him of his poverty, his childhood. Kindness to animals, teases lizard, my despair at leaving him, his sadness the night before, his dreamy eyes, the potency." During the following months, however, Anaïs began to recognize in Joaquin all the traits that had previously repelled her, and she began to doubt the relationship. She visited Dr. Otto Rank, who advised her to abandon her father to punish him. The doubts grew, but father and daughter remained intimate for the time being. In 1934, sensing that the bond with Anaïs was crumbling, Joaquin wrote several letters in which he tried to rationalize the relationship, implying they were kindred spirits who satisfied each other when no one else could. While Anaïs still enjoyed her father's physicality, the relationship was doomed by the harsh reality that Joaquin Nin was essentially the same man who had abandoned the family 21 years before. As Anaïs's awareness of her father as a superficial, lying philanderer grew, so did her relationship with Otto Rank. He satisfied for the time being Anaïs's need for a father figure, and sensing her need for Joaquin dissipating, she began to lash out at him. Anaïs rebelled against her father's wayward ways. While they both had agreed they could entertain other lovers, both of them became increasingly jealous, he of Henry Miller, she of all the other women her father had romanced, including Maruca. Anaïs, declaring herself a tigress, began to make Joaquin suffer the way he'd made her suffer. For all intents and purposes, the affair was over by spring 1934, less than a year after beginning. Contrary to popular belief, the two kept up their correspondence and saw each other occasionally in Paris. In the meantime, there was trouble brewing in Joaquin's marriage with Maruca. In August 1938, Maruca wrote to Anaïs, "Come immediately to see me. I am divorcing your father." Maruca had long suspected that Joaquin was having affairs during his time away from her, and when the servants reported that Joaquin was involved with a singer, she rebelled. It was she who had supported him during the nearly 2 decades of the marriage, who coddled him, put up with his egotistical ways, who gave him freedom which he abused. It was over, and with the divorce, Joaquin was suddenly destitute. Anaïs visited him at the house Maruca had provided him in Paris. Anaïs writes, "As we stood there looking at his house for the last time, the bowels of the earth trembled. Maruca was quietly eating her breakfast while his life cracked open and all the lovingly collected possessions fell into an abysm. The earth opened under his perpetually dancing feet, his waltzes of courtship, his contrapuntal love scenes. In one instant, it swallowed the colorful ballet of his lies, his pointed feet evasions, his vaporous escapes, the stage lights and halos with which he surrounded his conquests and his appetites." In 1939, Joaquin left for Cuba to be cared for by his cousins. Anaïs would never see him again. He died there penniless in 1949. Although she hadn't seen her father for 10 years, Anaïs expressed her grief in her diary. "Father died this morning. The hurt, the shock, the loss, as if I had died with him. I feel myself colliding with death, breaking, falling. I wept not to have seen him, not to have forgiven him, not to have held him in my arms. He died alone and poor in a Cuban hospital. He collapsed Thursday. That's all I know. I received the telegram from Joaquin in the morning. I didn't want to weep. It seemed as if I would die with him. Then I wept. I felt the loss in my body, this terrible unfulfilled love, never to have come close to him, never to have truly fused with him." Anaïs artistically preserved the relationship with her father in a novella called Lilith in her Winter of Artifice, originally published in 1939. Even though the prose was poetic and symbolic, the underlying passion is quite clear. She writes, "Inside both our heads, As we sat there, he leaning against a pillow and I against the foot of the bed, there was a concert going on. The orchestra all in one voice now, for an instant, in love with the harp singing God, and the violins shaking their hair, and I passing the violin bow gently between my legs, drawing music out of my body foaming, the harp singing God, while all the women of the world lay under him in a ritual of fecundation, the drum beating sex. And long after his death, Joaquin lingered ghost-like in Anaïs's mind, work, and diary, right up to days before her death, when she told her friend Barbara Kraft that Papa is waiting for me on the other side when I cross over. The public would not know about the affair until 1992, when Anaïs Nin's unexpurgated diary Incest was published. Many readers and friends were shocked by the revelations, and while some condemned Anaïs for moral reasons, others questioned whether the incest passages were true, including her brother Joaquin Nin.
I can see the psychiatrist saying to her, you know, in order to get rid of your imperative attachment to your father, you should write about him and write all the things that you would have liked to have happened to you. And I think that her so-called amorous experience with her father may have been a therapeutic writing that her psychiatrist suggested. I'm not so sure that happened.
Reunited settles the idea that the affair was fiction. The fact that two participants freely discuss it in their correspondence is proof of its authenticity. It reminds us that while Otto Rank helped Anaïs deal with her feelings about the affair, he couldn't have suggested to her that she write out her so-called fantasies because she hadn't met him yet when the incest passages were written. And Reunited makes it clear that it was Joaquin who seduced his daughter with his letters, not the other way around. I have long said that if one wants to truly understand Anaïs Nin's life and work, one must begin with her father. Reunited is available at Amazon. I encourage you to read it. You will discover an incredible world created by two impassioned and misguided artists, a world that informs Anaïs Nin's writing and life choices. I want to remind you to subscribe to our Anaïs Nin channel so you can be alerted to future episodes of Catching Up with Anaïs Nin. I'm Paul Herron. Thank you for watching. See you the next time.